My career in medicine started out fairly conventionally, and I was quite a conventional doctor for about 20 years in Mill Valley. And the experience that got me off this path and onto a different path occurred in 1978. I had started attending alternative medical meetings. It took me about 12-15 years to realize that doctors in medical school learn as much as they can, but that the practice of medicine is much more complicated, much broader than we're led to believe. And also, a lot of the things that we were taught in medical school turn out to be wrong. In fact, when I go back for class reunions, the dean of the University of Minnesota Medical School is always a new dean. Deans don't last very long. And so every 10 years there's always a new dean, but they always have the same joke. And the joke is that things are changing so rapidly in medicine now due to new discoveries that we have to change what we teach. And in fact, the half-life of knowledge taught in medical school these days is about 5 to 7 years, which means in every 5 to 7 years, half of what was taught turns out to be wrong some way or another, and you have to make these changes. The joke is that they don't know which half. If you hang around long enough, what was found to be true once and then is thrown out for a while, then it comes back and is true again. Chocolate, it's back in favor again. So it's got a lot of good magnesium, and it's antidepressant, and it doesn't hurt anybody, and all those sort of things. And fat now is good. Now you just have to know which is the good fat and which is the bad fats. And all sorts of things change all the time. So I discovered that there are lots of things I didn't know. And I found that in some of these alternative meetings, there were brilliant people there who had things I could learn from. I learned a lot about nutrition, for instance, from the alternative meetings I attended, but not from medical school. But at any rate, in 1978, I heard this talk by Ray Peat, a PhD biochemist, one of these young geniuses. His PhD thesis had been on the multiple roles of progesterone. And he gave this talk, and he challenged the doctors there. There are about 400 doctors there, and he challenged the doctors by saying, why is it that when doctors remove the ovaries from some woman, and they know that the ovaries generally make several estrogens, testosterone, and progesterone, and they remove these organs, why is it that they only give one back? Why do they only give a little estrogen back? And I thought, that's a good question. Why do we do that? Here we are, or some woman goes through menopause, and the doctor says, oh, you're not making any estrogen, you have to take some. Well, what about the other hormones? The other hormones that balanced in your body all the time that you had them, the testosterone and the progesterone, and all their effects, they all work together like a team. Why do we only give one back? So I got a hold of Ray Peat after his talk. It was a fun meeting. I'd been invited to give a talk on sugar, hypoglycemia, and Linus Pauling was there to give a talk on orthomolecular medicine. So this was kind of fun in those days to have all this fermentation of all this new stuff to learn and to see the application and to make sense out of it. But I got hold of Ray Peat, and he gave me all his references. He had about 96 references, like Martin Luther with his 90 Theses, you know. And but at any rate, each reference, each paper had about 20 or 30 more references. And I, with the help of the librarian at Marin General Hospital, I tracked down all these references. And I was learning things about progesterone that I'd never learned in medical school. I thought that I must have slept through a class because they didn't teach me all of this, all the wonderful things that progesterone does and how important it is in the body. And then I began talking to my colleagues, and I discovered we'd all slept through the same class. Nobody knew about the real hormone. They all knew about the synthetic hormones, the things that are in birth control pills and the things that we give women at menopause. Those aren't the real hormones. Those are synthetic versions. They're not the same molecule. And I began to get the glimmer of understanding that a big scam has been perpetrated on the American woman. And in other parts of the world, women go through menopause, and they don't bother to see a doctor for that. It's a normal change of life. And the other parts of the world, the women don't get breast cancer like we do here in the United States. But they're telling people in the United States that menopause is a disease. It's a condition where you're deficient in estrogen. Now, that's the first thing I looked up. I went to the library and looked up studies where they compare the estrogen levels 5 years before and 5 years after menopause, and discovered that estrone, one of the major estrogens, only declines about 40%. Estradiol declines about 60%. But you're still making plenty of estrogen. In fact, recent studies up until just the last year showed that women up to age 80, 65% of them make plenty of estrogen. They got away with this scam by convincing the doctors that menopause is a disease of estrogen deficiency and that all women need estrogen. Imagine the marketing potential here. All women, as they arrive at menopause, are put on a drug. They're supposed to take that drug till they die. What a marketing victory that is, if they could convince people of that. And you wonder, well, how did they convince the doctors of that? Because there's nothing in the medical literature that says it is. It's a normal change of life. And it's like going through puberty. You don't have to go to a doctor about that. And going through menopause, you don't have to go through a doctor about that. I wondered why, as doctors, we tended to believe these advertisements. And then I realized that another major machine, a major method for conditioning doctors' minds is called Continuing Medical Education, CME, credits. You have to go to meetings where you get credits. You have to accumulate 50 hours of credits every 3 years or you lose your license. Did you know that? Yeah, doctors have to do that. And so there's lots of meetings to go to, but only some of them do you have official credits. So I was editor of our Marin County Medical Bulletin at the time. I was editor longer than anybody else in Marin County. And in fact, they don't even have it anymore. Doctors don't even pretend that they belong to an organization that is independent and intelligent and so on. They've dropped all that. They just take their orders from the pharmaceutical companies. But at any rate, I called up the state in Sacramento to find out who gives the credits. So which seminar gets the credit so you can continue to hold your license. Oh, they say, we let the AMA do that. Now, isn't that odd? That's like setting a speed limit and then letting the Boy Scouts do the work. You know, it doesn't make any sense. But they said, oh, we let the AMA do that. They're the ones who determine. They tell us what meetings that you have credits that count. So I called the AMA in Chicago, Illinois, and I said, is it true that you're the guys that determine who gets the credits? They said, yes. I said, how do you do that? And they said, well, we have a committee. And I said, could you give me the names of the people on the committee? So they did. And none of them are doctors. They're all from the pharmaceutical companies. Whoa! You know, all of a sudden things began to fall into place. I'm going to start by reviewing the year 2000 from AMA, the AMA Journal Studies. As you know, for the last 30, 40 years, the standard practice has been to give HRT, I call it conventional HRT, because HRT just means hormone replacement therapy. It's kind of generic. It could be talking about insulin, it could be talking about thyroid, it could be talking about anything, hormone replacement therapy. But the conventional HRT means that the doctor is going to be giving you a powerful estrogen, probably Premarin, that they get from pregnant mare's urine, and a synthetic progestin called Provera. That's 99% of what the doctors give. And you are told that you need this because you're deficient, that somehow women are damaged goods. Mother Nature had a problem, and somehow you all came out flawed. And you need to have doctors help you with your hormones when you're 45 years old. Total nonsense, of course. But they got that across. And even if you got side effects from them, like gaining weight, or swollen breasts, or fibrocystic breasts, or headaches. Headaches are very common when you give estrogen that way. And anyway, then you're told, but you need it to prevent heart attacks. You need it to prevent strokes. You need it to prevent aging. You need it to prevent Alzheimer's. And they keep coming out with these things you need it for, and people keep buying into this myth. And here I am trying to track down, how do they say these things? Where is the study? Where is the study that shows that taking estrogen prevents a heart attack? Turns out there is no study. Where is the study that shows that it prevents Alzheimer's? There is no study that takes two equal groups and shows that estrogen prevents Alzheimer's. Coffee and caffeine prevents Alzheimer's. Did you know that? The statistics show that if you load up with caffeine, I hope everybody loaded up with caffeine today, because we got 2 or 3 hours of intense study here, and we want your brain cells to be working. So I'm going to take you on a little tour through 2000, because in the year 2002, in last year, the year that we're in now, in December, in this last year, all the claims that conventional medicine has made about HRT have been found to be false. All the claims of safety and not only the benefits don't happen, but it turns out HRT is the main cause of breast cancer. So where's the mystery? In Heartland, USA, when people arrive at menopause, less than 50% of the women even bother to talk about it. They certainly don't go to their doctors about it. They figure it's just a time of life. Of those that go to their doctor in Heartland, USA, some of them, not all of them, but a good percentage, are sent out of the office with a prescription for HRT. Less than 50% of those prescriptions are filled. The women say, oh no, Maud down the road, she took this and she ballooned up and she got a stroke. So women don't do it. 50% don't bother to fill the first prescription. Of the women who fill the first prescription, only 15% are still taking the prescription 2 years later. These are facts. If we take 15% of 50%, we have a pretty small number of people. We're talking about 10 or 12% of people in Heartland, USA, who continue to take HRT year after year after year. Guess what it is in Marin County? It's well over 50% of the women by menopause time are on HRT, and they stick to it. The women here bought into the myth that HRT is safe and is good for you and you need it. And they're sticking to their HRT. They want to remain young. They want to remain sexy. They do probably eat pretty well. And they probably get together in support groups and all sorts of things like that. They may do some things that are good. But let me show you something. This is the first study of 2002 in January, reported in the AMA Journal. It's the Chen study from the University of Washington. It's also called the Puget Sound study. It was a large study. Through the records of the hospital at Washington University, they found a whole bunch of women who'd been there because of breast cancer. Then they found a whole bunch of women who had been through the hospital for other things, and they matched them. They matched them for age and the number of kids that they've had and how long they've been married and where they lived and what sort of diet they had and whether they drank a lot or played bingo or whatever. They found a matched group that hadn't had breast cancer. Then they asked them, tell me about your HRT. How many of you have been taking HRT? And they took the ones, as you can see, the orange or yellowish ones. This is the breast cancer rate of the people who've been on HRT for 5 years. The green are the people had breast cancer who had never been on HRT. And the increase of breast cancer that occurs only from HRT is somewhere between 80 and 90%. In fact, this is just about double. This is the control. If their number is averaged out as 1, then these numbers are all 1.6 or higher. So we can look at this and we can say HRT by itself, as given by local doctors and the so-called authorities, almost doubles your risk of having breast cancer. Now do the math. If 5% of the population has HRT and 95% doesn't, you'll get a certain number of breast cancers. But what if 50% of the people are on HRT? You're going to get a much higher number. Now, in the newspapers and with the authorities that women are receiving, they have not geography It's demography. It's in the demographic situation of having enough money and time to go to the doctor and get all these hormones and stick to it, and you feel that you're doing the right thing because you're doing what your doctor said. But look what's going to happen. They're going to have this high rate of breast cancer. I'm surprised that the rate isn't 10 times higher than all across America. They're probably doing some things that are pretty good. They're probably on a pretty good diet. They probably have a good support group going. But the rate here is 2 or 3 times what it ought to be. And it is in other places here and there throughout the United States. And it's always in the same situation. You have a high, well-to-do clientele, and they stick to their HRT. That's it. The mystery is over. We know what causes the extra cases of breast cancer. There are more of you following HRT, and HRT causes the breast cancer. Simple as that. There are other causes too, but those were all balanced out in these. But this is the increase due just to HRT. So here we have the first crack out of the box in 2002. Now, we've been writing a book about this for 2 years, and it came out in January, all published. And we have 20 years of studies that we averaged out. And look, from the average we found before the Chen study, synthetic progestins like Provera, when combined with estrogens like Premarin, increase breast cancer risk 1.4 to 2-fold. Same thing. Someplace between 1.5 to doubling the amount of breast cancer. Do you know how many women in 2001 died of breast cancer in the United States? 43,000. 43,000 women. You know how many people died in the terrorist attack September last year? 3,000. If you had a terrorist attack every month for a whole damn year, you would have 36,000 women, 36,000 people killed. And we're killing 43,000 people with breast cancer. And this year it's going to be 46,000. It's climbing. The problem has been created here because you've been deliberately given wrong information. You have no way of understanding the problem unless you go and look and find what's really happening. Now, how does this come about? It's because the plan that they have works so well. Do you know what the major profit-making prescription drug is for the last 30 years? Estrogen. They're making money on estrogen. The company that makes Provera with the Premarin makes almost $3 billion a year. If you add up the other companies with their combinations, we're talking $8 billion a year. They do not want to lose that market. They're willing to have the women die to keep up the bandwagon of buying HRT. Now, I'm not against HRT. I just want to define it differently. If someone is deficient in a hormone, it's perfectly fine to find a way to try to restore that hormone because the hormone is needed. Who, on the other hand, would give insulin to somebody without knowing whether or not they needed it? They're giving estrogen to women who are perfectly healthy, and they're killing them to maintain this profitable scam. These are hard words, but let me show you what the evidence is. So our book had arrived at the same thing that Dr. Chen had found. Now, I'm going to go through these. Probably can't read, I'm going to read them to you. These are the things that showed up this year because of the Women's Health Initiative. You know about the Women's Health Initiative? They took your tax money, multi-millions of it, and said, we're going to do some studies that need to be done. Now, the pharmaceutical company managed to get that changed and say, no, we're not going to look at real hormones, we're only going to look at the synthetic hormones. So they started out that way, and the whole experiment backfired on them because even using the best possible, healthiest women, they still discovered the study had to be stopped and because the women were dying, and they couldn't do it. The people had bought the idea that estrogen, HRT, maintains youthful femininity, prevents heart disease, bone loss, Alzheimer's, and aging. The new studies show that none of that is true. First one was the Chen study. The next one in February, Dr. Cummings here at the University of California, along with other medical institutions across the country, discovered that, hey, if you selected out not the conventional estradiol level, the estrogen level, because that has never been able to predict who's going to get breast cancer. They always claimed that, look, we can measure estradiol levels and they don't relate to who gets breast cancer. Well, Dr. Cummings found if you do the test right and select out a type of the hormone that floats around in your body called free estradiol, it's not bound to a big protein, it's not in the process of being excreted, it's the active hormone. If you do that, you can predict who's going to get breast cancer. Conventional serum tests of estradiol levels do not. The doctors have been kept in the dark on how to do the test. I have to tell you a little bit about how this happens. When the ovary makes these hormones, or the doctor gives you the hormones, it floats around in the bloodstream. And when it passes through the liver's job is to make a protein that binds to it, that makes it water soluble, so it can be pee-peed out in the urine. It's a very dynamic process. The length of time that the hormones last is very short, probably in the range of 5 or 10 minutes in your body. And then it goes through the liver, gets protein bound, that makes it water soluble, so it's in the serum, and it goes through the kidney and washes out in the urine. That's what happens all the time. But that hormone should not be counted because it's no longer bioavailable. The real hormone has to be free, has to be unencumbered by all this extra protein that's wrapped it up. So unless they know how to do that, they have no way to know what the real hormone level is. So that's how they pretended all these years that estrogen doesn't make breast cancer. Because they were looking in the wrong part of the blood, they got the wrong numbers, and it didn't matter. So Dr. Cummings in February showed that, oh yeah, if you find the right hormone, you can predict who's going to get breast cancer. In fact, Dr. Zava, who's a co-author for our book, he's been doing saliva tests for the last 30 years or 25 years. He has the largest data bank of saliva test results in the world. And saliva tests measure only the free hormone. The hormone that's bound to protein doesn't filter through the saliva glands into your saliva. Only the real hormone does. So when you do a saliva test, you're looking at the concentration of the real hormone. And he told me, he's been so busy, he hasn't had time to write it up, but in his computer, he selected out 3,000 women who had had breast cancer later on. And he found that in all 3,000, they had elevated estradiol levels and low progesterone levels. 3,000 out of 3,000. Can you imagine? So then he looked up 3,000 women who didn't get breast cancer over the same period of time, and they didn't have estrogen dominance. When you don't have estrogen dominance, you don't get breast cancer. When you have estrogen dominance, you do get breast cancer. So this is actually the people who funded this study want to sell a synthetic estrogen that won't cause breast cancer. They say, Mother Nature made a mistake with your hormones, and their hormones will cause breast cancer. So we have this synthetic drug that we want to sell, and now we can pick out who should buy the drug so they don't get it. The drug is a terrible drug. Then on the 3rd of July, there was a 6.8-year follow-up of the PremPro study. The PremPro study was, they were taking women who were menopausal, and some of them got Premarin and Provera, and the other got placebo, and then they were just watching to see who gets heart attacks. So they followed this along for 6.8 years and found that there was no heart benefit from Premarin and Provera. In fact, the heart attacks were slightly higher in the women taking the synthetic drugs. So that was in July. One big calamity after another happened to conventional medicine. 17th of July, the Women's Health Initiative HRT study was stopped because of unacceptable incidence of breast cancer, strokes, gallbladder disease compared to the controls. They had to stop the study. Too many women were dying. And let me tell you about this study. This study was deliberately designed so women shouldn't die or get sick. They used only women who were healthy. They chose all these 8,000 women who had no health problems whatsoever. And 3 years later, they were dying. They had to stop the study. And by the way, a similar study in England was stopped for the same reason. This was going on elsewhere. England has the same problem that we do. And they had to stop the study. What they didn't report in the study was over 45% of the women dropped out of the study because of side effects of the estrogen. Do you know what spin doctoring is? You take some test results and then you give it a spin. You try to make it tell you something other than what it really tells you. The spin doctors say, oh, well, if we're not going to give 5 years of HRT, we'll just give 3 years or 2 years. However, the study doctors who did the study, they said, oh no, we've been keeping track of the women who dropped out after a year or two, and they're getting the breast cancer. There's no easy way out. The only interpretation is that the HRT being given by conventional medicine is wrong HRT. They're doing something wrong here. Women start out, they make their hormones at puberty, they make them they're full women with breasts and pubic hair and periods, and they're strong, they're healthier than men, they can have babies, and they're all in good health and everything's going great, and then they get to be 45 years old, and the hormones have been good for them all these years. That's part of what makes women so strong and so smart and intuitive, and everything else is their hormone balance is great. But when they get up in the late 30s and the 40s, their hormone balance begins to get off. And so they go to the doctor. They say, hey, I've gained weight, my breasts are tender, I can't sleep on my stomach, I have headaches every time of the month, my period comes and it's heavier and all that. And he said, well, ma'am, you're approaching menopause, you need some estrogen. They have plenty of estrogen, they're still having periods. What kind of doctor would then say, you need estrogen? I have to admit, I was that kind of doctor for about 12, 15 years. But after learning about the scam that was going on, I became more and more educated. I have a garage full of references. I have 8, 10 more 3-level file cases full of, I have thousands of references. No doctor you've ever talked to has even seen that many references, let alone read them. And doctors don't read the references anymore. They read only the little summaries. And in the summaries, if you can believe it, the summaries do not say what the study says. A study was done on that, and they found that only 5% of them does the summary say what the study really did. See, that's all called spin doctoring. It occurs before it even shows up in the newspaper. And the newspapers don't care. The TVs, they only want news. They don't care if it's true or not. They just say, oh, there's a doctor in Indianapolis who reports such and such, that you're going to get such and such. They don't know what he's talking about, and they don't care. They get it as all made out, so he can just speak it off and he can go out and play golf. So look at this, what happened to poor old general medicine. In the 17th of July, here's another one in the same journal. 20 years of estrogen-only therapy for people with hysterectomy increased ovarian cancer by 300%. You didn't even hear about that one, and that was in the same journal. Then the 28th of August, another part of the Women's Health Initiative study, they found that C-reactive protein is a marker for general inflammation in your body. It's also the most important marker for who gets heart attacks. Cholesterol has no significance. Zero. You can measure cholesterol on people and you cannot predict who's going to have a heart attack. But you measure C-reactive protein and you can predict who's going to have a heart attack. It's an inflammatory disease. It's not a plumbing disease. It's not the blood flow through the coronary arteries per se or clots. It's the fact that inflammation is there, and that's what causes it. And CRT, and guess what? HRT increases C-reactive protein, an important independent biomarker for heart disease. There is evidence right there that you don't want to overload people on estrogen because it makes the CRT go up, and the CRT going up is a sign you're going to have a heart attack. Wow. Then, in September, the Annals of Internal Medicine in Canada, they reported the largest, longest-running test of mammograms on women. They used over 50,000 women. Our American study only used 5,000 or 8,000. The Canadian study had 50,000 women, and they followed them for 16 years, comparing the breast cancer deaths in people who had mammograms and people who didn't. Guess what they found? No survival benefit Zero. There is no question about this. This is the answer. Finding these breast cancers 6 months or a year sooner changes nothing. It has taken 7 to 8 years for the cancer to grow to become the size it is to be found by mammograms. The next year you'd find it with a lump. But the difference in the outcome is zero. Now that can mean two things. One is that you didn't find it soon enough. They still want to believe, gee, if we find it soon enough and we remove the breast, that'll do it. Removing the breast does not treat the disease. All disease is due to an underlying metabolic disorder. Something in those cells is telling those cells to turn into cancer cells. Cancer cells are normal cells that are changed. Something in the cell does that. That's the underlying metabolic imbalance. And if you find the underlying metabolic imbalance and correct that, then you're treating the disease. Removing the tumor that developed because of the disease is not treating the disease. You all follow that? Yeah, that ought to be clear. Now the funny thing is, the doctors know this. And they will tell the woman, well, now that you've had one breast cancer, the odds are much greater you're going to have cancer in the other breast. Of course they're greater, because he's leaving the disease unattended. So guess what his solution is? We're going to give you a poison that blocks estrogen receptors in the breast, tamoxifen. Doesn't dawn on him that he could just add a little progesterone. It's the balance in there that matters. It's not the estrogen, it's the balance. The fact that estrogen has become dominant and progesterone has disappeared. He's not interested in that. He wants to give you a patented drug, a drug that wants to make money. They should take out the tumor and correct the underlying metabolic imbalance. They're not mutually incompatible. That's what you ought to do. Why leave the tumor there? So yes, I'm all for doing that with me. I'd have the tumor out. But I would hope that the doctor would be able to correct the underlying metabolic imbalance. Tamoxifen does not correct the underlying metabolic imbalance. It's never worked. Our government and the FDA passed a regulation 4 years ago telling the makers of tamoxifen they could not claim that it prevented cancer. So they can't do that. But they can buy doctors and have them claim it. A little escape hole in the law. Isn't that amazing? So doctors go around thinking, gee, somebody over at Cincinnati says we should continue to use tamoxifen. Now, tamoxifen is blocked in the breast, but it is estrogenic in the uterus, and it causes cancer of the uterus. Now, normally, cancer of the uterus is a very benign disease. It shows up as a little bleeding here and there, and you find it. You do a pap smear, and you see abnormal cells, and you remove the uterus, and it's gone. Okay? If you get cancer of the uterus when you're on tamoxifen, it's a different ballgame. Instead of 0 deaths, there's 87% of you will die. It's a very rapid, untreatable malignancy if it's caused by tamoxifen. Tamoxifen also increases your risk of strokes and blindness. And it does no good. There is no test that shows that it works. And yet that's what the doctor gives you. Because he knows that your own estrogen is going to cause the breast cancer in the other breast. Or he might recommend, let's remove the other breast right now. Then you won't get it. And women are buying that. Instead of saying, let's find what's causing this, and then we can correct the underlying metabolic imbalance, and then it won't happen. So this is what happened in the year 2000. In the matter of HRT and mammograms, we can no longer rely on statements and claims made by conventional medicine. They have been lying to you for 30, 40 years. And this year, 2002, proved that. Everybody knows that now. And guess who they go to say, help us fix the problem? They go to the people who made the problem. HRT should be abandoned. Conventional HRT should be abandoned. Okay. Isn't that fun? I'm going to show you the slide from the last one in Canada. This is the curve of breast cancers and the curve of deaths from breast cancer. And these are the years of following. And we're talking 50,000 women here. These are breast cancers found with and without mammograms. Breast cancers find a little microcalcification every once in a while on a thing that doesn't become a tumor. And that's called carcinoma in situ, ductal carcinoma in situ. If this is the site that I'm standing on, or picture a lawn, if you had a dandelion here and there, that'd be dandelion-oma in situ. If you had a huge mound of dandelions that is growing and no grass can grow underneath it, it's eating away the place where the grass should grow, and it's becoming a huge mound and it's palpable. You could feel it. If you're blind, you could feel it. Then that's a true carcinoma. Oma means tumor. So carcinoma in situ means a tumor that's not a tumor. It's an oxymoron. The doctors in England wrote an editorial about this. Have our American brothers run amok. They know what in situ means, and they know what oma means. Oma means tumor. It's not a tumor, it's a scattering of little cells here and there that don't look quite right, and they're not cancer. And they can only be picked up on mammogram. That's why you have a slightly higher curve for the mammogram finding, and they're calling it a type of breast cancer. They love to call it a type of breast cancer because it won't kill you, because it's not breast cancer. So whatever they do to it, you have a 5-year survival of 100%. Even if you do nothing, you have a 5-year survival of 100%. But they give those folks tamoxifen. And so they say, look, survival is 100%. They call it carcinoma in situ. At any rate, it didn't change the ultimate death rate. This is the death rate on people who've had mammograms, and this is the death rate of people who didn't, the usual care group. And you'll see that over the period of years, there's actually more deaths due to breast cancer in the ones who are doing mammograms. And there is no evidence of any survival benefit. That is it. You just have to accept that. There is no argument here. It's a stupid test to do. Thermograms are probably going to turn out to be much better. But the whole point is, we know how to prevent the breast cancer. And that's what I'm going to teach you. First, you have to understand how hormones work. Compounds that are made by one part of the body that circulate around in the bloodstream and are active at other parts of the body. They carry a message. They're messengers. However, that simple explanation isn't quite right. They float around in the bloodstream, and then they have to get out of the bloodstream. They have to get into the extracellular space. They have to get in the space between the cells because they need to combine with a receptor. That R stands for receptor inside the cell. The cell, you have 70 trillion cells. Did you know that? And they have to anticipate the arrival of the hormone by making a receptor. It's like making a phone so you can get a phone call. The cell has to be able to do that. Not all hormones necessarily affect all cells in your body. For instance, estrogen affects primarily breasts, so you grow breasts. It affects the lining of the uterus, so you build up a layer of blood every month to try to make a place for a fertilized egg to implant. So there are certain parts, but in general, these receptors are all through the body, and especially in terms of progesterone. I can find no part of the body that doesn't have progesterone receptors. This will become important later. I'll show you. But at any rate, the important thing here is the hormone doesn't work by itself. If the hormone came floating through those doors, and we're a cell, say a fat cell or a brain cell or a muscle cell, if that hormone floated in there and then floated on out the other side, if we didn't have a receptor for it, we'd never know. Just as there are radio waves going through us right now, and we don't have our receptors on for that, or we'd hear radio or television, whatever. You have to have the receptor. So the cells have to make the receptor. Guess what tells the cells to make the receptor? Estrogen. When you, the females and the boys at puberty, start making estrogen, it's the estrogen that tells the cells to make the progesterone receptor. Because sooner or later the progesterone will be on the way, and we need to have a receptor for it. This proves that these two hormones work in tandem. They work together. It's like yin and yang. They do different things, but it's the combination of both sides that produces the ultimate benefit to the person. So at any rate, once they bind together, you have a receptor and the hormone together, it goes up to the boardroom, up in the nucleus of the cell. And there's where you have your 23 pairs of chromosomes. Now chromosomes are very interesting. To study them, they would take a cell and select out the nucleus and then flambe it. They'd heat it up, and the heat would cause it all to contract. These are long filamentous chains. If one were as thick as my wrist, it would extend from here to Sacramento, thinner than a hair. And we have, I forget what it is, 25,000 gene sites or 250,000 gene sites. But what it has to do is to traverse up and down the gene sites on the chromosomes until it finds just the right one. The combining to the receptor in the beginning depends, it's like a lock and a key. The two molecules have to be fitting identically. You have to have a spot on the receptor protein so that the hormone molecule fits just inside, or a portion of it. It has to be perfect. And then it goes up there and it finds the right gene, activates a gene which through messenger RNA activates the ribosome to make enzymes, which then tell the cell what to do. They carry out the metabolic function of the cell. So the hormones carry messages. They travel through the bloodstream. They have to be the free hormone. They have to combine with the receptor. They have to get to the nucleus. And once they've done that in the nucleus, they let go. The receptor lets go of the hormone, and the hormone floats out and keeps doing that until sooner or later it goes through the liver, and then the liver coats it with a great big globulin protein, which makes it water soluble, which means it's no longer doing its work. It's riding around in the serum, and when it goes through the kidney, it'll go out in the urine. So that's the whole life story of a progesterone molecule. And this is where they all have to work. So these hormones are all very fat soluble. All the sex hormones are made from cholesterol. You need cholesterol. You make cholesterol by eating sugar. If you eat way too much sugar and highly refined starches, you will make too much cholesterol. But in general, you have to make cholesterol to make the hormones. They're very important. Cholesterol is important for lots of other things. Cholesterol is not the evil that everybody thinks it is. It's a necessary factor for life among mammals. At any rate, the hormone is made out of cholesterol, so it's very fatty. In fact, the sex hormones are the most fatty substances in the body. The estrogen, the testosterone, and the progesterone that you make are very fat soluble. So being fat soluble, they're not found in the serum. The serum is the watery part of the blood. They ride on the fatty parts that are not in the serum, that might be floating in the serum, but they're separate. And they might be riding on red blood cells, because the membranes of red blood cells are made of fats. So that's where they ride. Now, when the doctor does a blood test, he draws the blood and then spins the blood around in a centrifuge, and the watery part goes to one end and the fat part goes to the other end. And then he looks for the hormone just in the watery end. I'm reminded of the story of a couple that went out to dinner in San Francisco, and they came out at night, it was dark, and they had to get to their car park where their car was parked. And up ahead, under a street lamp, they saw a guy on his hands and knees. So they went up to him and said, "Pardon me, sir, do you need any help? Are you in some trouble?" He said, "Well, I lost my car keys and I'm trying to find them." "Oh, we'll help you." So they spent half an hour looking around under the sidewalk and the weeds and the curb and the street. Couldn't find it. And they said, "Well, how did you come to lose your car keys?" "Well," he said, "I came through that dark alley over there, and when I was going through the alley, I was getting something out of my pocket, and it's possible I could have dropped the keys over there." They said, "Well, why are you looking here?" They said, "Well, because the light is so much better." Well, this is what doctors do. They do this dumb test. They think it's a blood test, and the lab guy spins it down and separates the watery part off from the fat part, and then he looks for the hormone in the watery part. There's no way that he can give you a result which is meaningful. The same Dr. Cummings, 4 years ago, did a huge study about this and said that the serum levels are of no importance whatsoever. They are totally irrelevant. Doesn't say that it's an awkward thing to do or that the results aren't quite right or something like that. No, they said it's irrelevant. Don't do it. You want to find out how much of the real hormone you have, and that is done by doing saliva. If you apply some progesterone, or your body makes some progesterone, how does it end up in the saliva? Obviously, it circulates through the bloodstream. And in the salivary gland, it filters out directly into the saliva. So when you collect the saliva, you've got the measurement of how much of the real hormone is there. Very simple. Science has been using this for 20, 25 years. This is what the major science, hormone science research is based on saliva tests. Your typical doctor, and I get this all the time, I get phone calls all day long. I talked to my doctor about saliva and he said there's nothing to it. I said, your doctor is ignorant. There just is no way around it. He has no idea that he just made a very ignorant statement. You just have to be nice to him and say, oh, excuse me, doctor, but I can get you 200 references to show you that this is done, this is in science. Now you know that this is how hormones work. Now, when this hormone passes through the liver by itself, the liver binds it to this globulin. And bound to the globulin, it no longer can fit with the receptor, so it no longer is active. So you see, the importance is you have to know, if you're going to make any progress in understanding breast cancer, you have to know how much of the real hormone is around. Something is happening to women's ovaries. Something is damaging women's ovaries before they're born. So when they grow up, their little corpus luteum, their little follicles, when they ovulate, don't work as a progesterone factory anymore. By the age of 35, 50% of the people on this continent and in England no longer are making the progesterone that their moms made. I'll be telling you what that something is. I'll tell you right now. It is the pesticides from petrochemicals. We have 70,000 of these in the environment. They outgas out of the carpet, they outgas out of paint, they outgas out of, they're in your salad dressing, but primarily they're in their sprays. If you have a fly in the house and you spray the house, you're getting, and you're going to be breathing all these things. It doesn't hurt the adult. It's a tiny dose. In adult, your cells are mature, they've been differentiated, they're difficult to harm with this. But it hurts the baby. If you're pregnant, it hurts the baby. If it's a female baby, it damages the ovaries so they can't produce progesterone when that baby grows up. If it's a male baby, they can't produce sperm when the male baby grows up. Sperm counts have fallen over 50% in men by the time they're 35, compared to previous generations. This is a fact of life. We are poisoning the public. If you want to read about it, read Our Stolen Future. It's a wonderful book. It's written by a lady, PhD, and all of the veterinarians who've been studying this process that's going on in wildlife populations. They can't reproduce. They can't reproduce because the females can't make the progesterone anymore. And the males aren't making enough sperm anymore. It happens to birds. It happens to amphibians. It happens to all the animals that they've seen, the crocodiles, the Florida panther, the salmon in the North Sea. All sorts of things, all of our industrial, the industry, all of those poisons get into the waterways, they get into the oceans, they get into the rivers. The beluga whale and the St. Lawrence Seaway, they're all the same. They've all been damaged. You don't find it in the adults, you find it in the babies. So it's a generation later. So when our scientists looked at, let's feed some of this poison to some animals and see what happens. So they fed it to the adult animals and nothing happened. So they said it must be all right. So they allowed it to be sold. 70,000 different types of this. They're all poisonous. Had they watched to see what the babies would be like, they would have seen it. And now they've done that. So Theo Colburn was the chief author, and it's called Our Stolen Future. The idea is there are such a rise on people having cancer, such a rise in people who are having early miscarriages, that if the same increase continues to occur over the next 2 generations, the ability to carry a baby will be lost. So we have 2 generations to straighten this out. The second role is a precursor role. Once the body goes to all the work of making a progesterone molecule out of cholesterol, the body then uses the progesterone to make the other hormones. It makes androstenedione, testosterone, estrone, estradiol, estriol, corticosteroids, and aldosterone. Our body does that because it's more efficient. Now, if you're missing the progesterone, the body can still do it. It just doesn't do it as well. So the body uses that. Then you have all these intrinsic effects. Now realize this slide is 50 years old. This is what students were taught 50 years ago. It does all these things, protects against breast cancer, protects against endometrial cancer. I'm not going to go through them all. We have this in all our books. Restores estrogen receptor sensitivity, stimulates new bone formation. And this is just a small list of what we know now. One time I started to make a list of what we know now, and you couldn't put it on the paper. You couldn't see anything of it. But this is enough to show all this. So it's a marvelous hormone, and it has receptors for it all through the body. Now, when you compare estrogen with progesterone, you find that where one stimulates the breast, the other one protects the breast against fibrosis. One increases body fat, the other one helps use fat for energy. Now, the farmers all know that one. They take steers. Steers are these young cattle who have been castrated, no more testosterone, and they feed them a little estrogen, a little nickel's worth of estrogen a day, and that causes them to grow and get a lot of body fat and to gain weight and retain water, so they get the market weight cheaper, less time, and the farmer makes more money. So the farmers know that. Now, when the doctor gives you the estrogen, and you get fat, and you retain water, and you go to him, he says, "Oh dear, I guess I didn't give you enough." So he gives more, and now he creates heavy bleeding and clots, irregular bleeding, and you gain more weight. And so the doctor creates the situation where you start having heavy bleeding, so then you get a hysterectomy. Now think of this. Have you ever heard of Dr. Pavlov? He showed that positive reinforcement can change functional behavior. So what happens to the doctor who feeds you all this extra estrogen? You get all these diseases. You get all of these over here. You get poor sugar control. You get increased blood clotting. You get more strokes, decreased libido. All of these things happen. Interferes with thyroid hormone, salt and fluid. He gets to treat all of that. One thing after another he gets to treat. As long as he keeps you on excess estrogen and creates estrogen dominance, he has an ongoing woman with symptoms that are going to have to be treated the rest of her life. It's called a cash cow. You follow that? Eventually, one of the things you get from the estrogen kills you. That's the end of that cash cow, but he's got more coming. So this is what had me start thinking about balance, because it isn't the presence or absence of these things, it's the way they work together. There is a certain balance which is beneficial and not harmful. That's Mother Nature's intention. It's only when the doctor takes over and said, "I'll give you the hormones. These are the doses you ought to take." He creates the imbalance, which kills you. So it's not the absolute number, it's the balance. This is the progesterone molecule again, and this shows that Mother Nature uses it for making estrone, uses it for making testosterone, uses it for making cortisol, uses it for making corticosterone. What I want you to see, and this usually takes after a year or two of looking at these molecules, you'll see that when you look at the next one, the only difference is this little hydrogen and oxygen that's put on this corner, and one extra oxygen right there. So it's a difference of a water molecule. A couple hydrogens and an oxygen. By putting those atoms in, you change this hormone completely. When you change the configuration of the hormone, you change what it does. This hormone, for instance, tells bone cells to make more bone. This one tells bone cells, don't make any more new bone. The opposite message, just from the movement of one or two little atoms. Same thing with these two. These two different types of cortisone, they do two different things. And the only difference is this little attachment here of another hydroxyl group. And look down here on estrone and testosterone. This is estrone, and this is testosterone. If you move this hydrogen from here to here, you then have that, and you add a couple of carbons here to take away the double bond, you now have testosterone. They differ just by one or two atoms. This one tells the baby to grow up with a vagina, no penis, no testes, but to develop breasts and be able to have babies. This one tells the baby to grow up with a penis, no vagina, no breasts, but more muscle mass. Imagine the difference. And the difference in the atoms is so tiny. So the message of this slide is the configuration has to be perfect to do work, and any change in the configuration will change what the hormone does. Now I'll show you what conventional medicine does. It uses progesterone to add here an acetate group, and an extramethyl group. It's no longer progesterone. It's a totally different thing. It's medroxyprogesterone acetate. They call it Provera. The doctor is taught to believe that's progesterone. I went to the Marin Breast Cancer Health Watch and tried to explain this to them. And they said, oh no, this is progesterone. I had to leave the office. They would not accept the fact that this was not progesterone. You could look up in any biochemical book and you'd get this, you'd get what real progesterone is. That's progesterone. And this is not. It's as simple as that. This does not have the benefits of real progesterone. It has lots of terrible bad side effects. It also kills you with heart attacks. It also increases your risk of breast cancer, whereas progesterone protects. And the people that you trust here in the county, the so-called experts you go to, they think that that is progesterone. I don't know what it'll take to do it, for them to understand. They won't open a book and take a look. Now this is norgestrel. This is the most common of the birth control pills. And they call that progesterone too. But look, it's not made of progesterone, it's made of this. They get some horse testosterone. You see this is identical to this. Even to this is the same. They add a little ethylene group up here, and they put that in the birth control pills, and they tell the doctors that that's progesterone. Now, when the women take this birth control pill and they start growing facial hair from the testosterone that they're getting, they go to the doctor and say, gee, I don't think all this acne and this facial hair is right. I don't think I should take this birth control pill. And the doctor will say, yes, that's the progesterone effect. Ooh. Oh, can you imagine? And these are the people who tell you that you should go out looking for some cause of the breast cancer. These are the people who don't know they're giving you the breast cancer. These are the people who don't understand that HRT doubles your risk of breast cancer. The more people we get on HRT, the more people are going to die of breast cancer. What about some evidence? What does estrogen do to the breast? What does progesterone do? There is a doctor, Dr. Fournier and Deligny of France. They've been studying this for years. They've been doing studies showing what estrogen does and what progesterone does in the breast for years, and they cannot make doctors listen. So this study was published just a couple of years ago in Fertility and Sterility, 1995, on young women in Taiwan. They got these women to agree, these perfectly healthy women. There's a section of their cycle, when they have their period, when their ovaries are not making any hormone. They make the hormone, the estrogen starts about the 7th or 8th day after the cycle starts, and the progesterone kicks in about day 11, day 12. So you're only estrogen dominant for 3 or 4 days, and then the progesterone kicks in. So they went to the time of their cycle when they're not making any hormones, and they gave them either a progesterone cream or an estrogen cream or a combination. The progesterone cream was just 25 milligrams, one little dab. And the estradiol was 1.5 milligrams, about the same dose that doctors use. And then the combination was half and half. And then they gave a control cream. Very nice little study. And then they biopsied the breast. After a couple of days, they biopsied the breast to see how much of the hormone was there. So on the cream that had no hormone in it, it was 0. This is the control cream. No hormone was being made. From the progesterone one, it went from 0.6 to 66. It went up 100-fold just from one little dab of progesterone on your skin. Ask yourself, how did it get to the breast? Do you think it was magic? Do you think it somehow went out in the air and you breathed it in and it got to the breast? No. It went through the bloodstream. And there it is in the breast. increased 100-fold. And the estradiol is absorbed through the skin. This went from 10 to 90. This is another 100-fold increase. And when you gave half and half, this is what happened. They got half and half. This is proof that applying it to the skin allows it to be absorbed and get to the breast. Then they did more than that. They did 2 types of measurements to see if the cells in the breast were affected by the hormone. For the placebo, the cells in the breast had a certain activity rate that's indicated by this bar. Cells in the breast are always being newly created. They double. One cell becomes 2 cells. And that's called proliferation. This goes on all the time. So this would be the normal rate. Progesterone slowed the normal rate down very much. It stopped the proliferation. The excess proliferation of cells is the steps that what's happening in front of your eyes is that it's going to become cancer cells. It's a step along the way to cancer cells. Cells that proliferate too much and don't slow down are the ones that become the cancer cells. So progesterone slows it down. Estradiol just about doubled the rate. And when you gave the combination, it brought it back to where it was, the way Mother Nature intended. And here's another way of doing the same test, and they had the same results. Same thing. Progesterone protected the proliferation, estrogen increased it, combination kept it where it ought to be. So now we have the evidence that yes, estrogen might cause the breast to make cancer, and the progesterone prevents. But they did one more test. They did blood tests at the same time. They had thought they would see these hormones as they went through the bloodstream, that there'd be a surge in the bloodstream. And they used, not knowing any better, this 1995, these guys have been doing research for years, they didn't know that the real hormone rides on red blood cells, and that the amount in the serum is only for the hormone that has passed through the liver and has become protein bound, so it's water soluble, so it'll go through the liver, it'll go through the bloodstream, and then go out through the kidneys and be gone. They looked in the bloodstream. They found that it readily penetrated the skin, increasing breast progesterone 100-fold. It induced a biological response. It lowered proliferation rates of the breast duct cell. That's where cancer cells start. But it did not increase the serum progesterone. Isn't that amazing? They didn't find it there. So people say, how could you get those results? People tended to believe that it didn't happen. So they repeated the test. They repeated the test on older women who were menopausal, and they got the same results. Didn't dawn on them that there's another part of the blood, and that the hormone is carried by the fatty part of the blood. So here we have further proof that this is the way it works, because you can easily measure the fatty part of the blood. Now, does progesterone have an effect on breast cancer? People say, well, it's one thing to prevent it, but I already have my breast cancer. What do you got for me? Am I going to die from this? Because you tell me all the treatments are worthless. Well, let me show you this. This is by Dr. Moore in England, published in British Journal of Cancer, 1996. He went to the top hospitals in England, and he said, when you do surgery for breast cancer, I want you to draw some blood and set it aside. Now, he too didn't know about the best way to do it would be saliva test. However, if you have 0 amount in the blood by the watery part of the blood, that's meaningful. Or if you have a lot. So you can tell a lot or little, but you just can't tell the middle parts very well. So he saved the blood samples of people who had breast cancer surgery. And then after 18 years, he selected out those who had breast cancer with positive lymph nodes. And he looked up all the women to see if they were still alive. Some were still alive. These were people who had metastases to their lymph nodes at the day of surgery. So he looked to see what difference there was in the blood tests that he'd collected 18 years before. And he took those that had a pretty good level, over 4 nanograms per milliliter, and he found that in those people, about 65% were still alive 18 years later, whereas those who had practically no progesterone on the day of surgery, only about 30% were alive on the 18 years later. So the fact of your progesterone on the day of surgery changed your survival rate by 100%. There is no treatment available to you that is that powerful. The treatment you get maybe changes the ultimate survival by 5%. This changed survival by 100%. At any point, you can start using the progesterone and stop the continued growing of your breast cancer cells. Now, he started this in 1978, and I started in my practice in 1978 to use progesterone cream for women for all kinds of reasons. For those who had osteoporosis, for those who had fibrocystic breasts, for those who had weight gain, those who had tender breasts, those who had water retention, headaches, all those things that I could find that were due to estrogen dominance, I added the progesterone. There is not one study in the literature that shows that adding progesterone has any deleterious effect on anybody. You cannot be allergic to it. If you're allergic to it, you would not have made it through your embryo life. There is no study that shows there's any harm. So I did it. And then when I decided to stop practice, 12 years later, but I continued contacts with a lot of patients, I discovered none of my patients who had had breast cancer originally, and then I gave them progesterone after that, none of these people ever died of breast cancer. I didn't have any people die of breast cancer. Now I've been giving this talk for 10, 12 years around the country and around the world. I do this a lot. And I have doctors here and there, Dr. Leonetti in Pennsylvania, doctors in several places in Florida, doctors in Colorado, doctors in Alaska, doctors all over the world who have been doing this for now over 10 years. And they call me and they write me and they say, I have more than 3,500 women in my practice. They're on progesterone and nobody gets breast cancer. Do you realize what I just said? If you have the right amount of progesterone, you're not going to get breast cancer. If you have breast cancer and you add it, it'll save your life farther on down. It'll double your chances of survival 18 years later. That's not bad. That's good. Here's a company who made a product. They made Premarin from pregnant mare's urine, extracting the hormones, the horse hormones that are in there, and they made Provera, which is an altered progesterone. There's no more progesterone at all. And they make a combination so you can't separate one from the other. And they gave it to people, and they made all these problems. And so people over the years have been doing tests showing that, yes, this causes the breast cancer. These are all studies that just in the last 10, 15 years that all show the same thing. So it isn't that the Women's Health Initiative, but here's this company that was making this product and they were free to sell it. They had the sanction of the Food and Drug Administration. Imagine you go to the FDA and you say, I have a product that's pretty good for hot flashes. I'd like your okay so I could sell it for hot flashes. And they say, well, does it have any other side effect? Well, yes, it causes breast cancer, increases strokes, increases heart disease, causes gallbladder disease. People die sooner, they have a miserable life, they retain water, they get fat, they lose their marriages. You know, all these things happen. And there's no way they're going to get FDA approval. How did they get it in the beginning? Here they claim that there are guardians, that before a drug can be sold, they test it to see if it's safe. There was no test to see if it was safe. They managed to keep this up for over 40 years without having to do the test. Then they took the tax money from the Women's Health Initiative and used that to do the test that the pharmaceutical company should have done. They took a pharmaceutical product and tested it and found that it killed women. Why wasn't that done 30 years ago? How many women have been killed needlessly? I think there's a lawsuit someplace. Somebody's been lying to you for all these years on an easily disprovable fact, or provable fact. So I blame the pharmaceutical companies, then I blame the doctors for being so compliant as to write all those prescriptions. But you see, the positive reinforcement they get is they get to go to these meetings for free and they get to treat all these problems. Now, people say, do you know the mechanism? We would tend to believe you if you knew exactly how estrogen caused the breast cancer. Turns out that 5 years ago there was a symposium sponsored by the National Cancer Institute in Washington, D.C. They invited 26 speakers from cancer research centers around the world to come to Washington, D.C. and tell what they had learned about how estrogen causes cancer. All 26 of them had found mechanisms by which the estrogen causes the cancer. They not only found the mechanism that causes the breast cancer, but it also caused prostate cancer. You think that a study, now the doctor that was the lead speaker, Dr. Cavalieri, I'm going to be telling you about him. Dr. Cavalieri called me, and he said, John, you've got to come out to Washington, D.C. This is going to break their back. We have all this evidence. We know the mechanisms. We know how estrogen does this. There's no longer any doubt. He was giving the main speech. There were 25 other people giving their references. You got to come out. And I couldn't. I was on another trip. But I told some friends of mine on the East Coast, and they went. They called me back and said, this was the greatest conference I've ever been to. 26 sets of authorities all showed how estrogen causes these cancers. We now know what to do. We have to stop this estrogen dominance. There wasn't one story in the newspaper, no remark on the radio, nothing on television, nothing anywhere. It wasn't told to the doctors. It wasn't in their journals. There was nothing. The National Cancer Institute has it available. You can call them and they can send it to you. And I'm going to show you two examples of these mechanisms that are easy to understand. And so we know how this happens. There's no longer a doubt. It's not, gee whiz, maybe it correlates, maybe the statistics are right, but maybe it's something else. Maybe it's something in the air. Maybe it's something in the water. No, it's the estrogen. Now, here's one. This is Dr. Formby down at UC Santa Barbara. He has several PhDs. He's an expert in genetics, how the chromosome works. He's an expert in hormones, expert in biochemistry. He's an expert in finding the product that the genes make. When genes activate something, they make a product, ends up with a product that's in the cell. Estradiol activates, well, what he did was to take breast cancer cells first. And then he took endometrial cancer cells, and then he took prostate cancer cells. He found the same thing in all of them. Estradiol activates an oncogene, BCL2. An oncogene is a known cancer gene. All of us have known cancer genes in us. But we have other genes that keep it quiet. There is an oncogene called BCL2, stimulates cell hyperplasia, and inhibits apoptosis of the breast and the uterus, and this leads to cancer. Apoptosis means cells are programmed to die. Your skin cells are programmed to die. Your hair cells are programmed to die. Your red blood cells only last for 120 days. Your white blood cells only last for 24 or 48 hours. Everything is programmed to die and to be remade. This is how you stay healthy, is you remake the good ones. You don't keep the bad. If you have cells in your breast that are multiplying, hyperplasia, multiplying more rapidly, if they don't die on time, your breasts are going to get bigger and bigger, and you'd have to carry them in a wagon and walk along with your breast dangling in a wagon. But they do, they die on time. And then white blood cells come in and clean them up, and new cells are made. This is what happens. Well, here they found that estradiol activates a gene that stimulates hyperplasia, inhibits apoptosis, and that's the direct thing that causes cancer. Conversely, progesterone activates a different gene, P53, inhibits the action of inhibiting cell hyperplasia and restoring normal apoptosis. It therefore acts against cancer. It stops cancer from growing. And the balance of these two hormones and their respective effects on P53 and BCL2 is a major determinant of breast and uterine cancer. Now this is what he got published. He got this published, so everybody knows. This was in the Annals of Clinical and Laboratory Science, 1998. Soon be 5 years ago. No one has disputed this. We know what happens. You can measure the gene. You give the estradiol, bango, the cancer gene turns on. He measured the product. So he did the same thing with prostate cancer cells. And he got the same results. So he sent them to the same journals to be published. And they refused. And he said, why are you refusing it now? And they said, well, we gave it to a peer review group, three doctors. And we'll send you their results. One of them said, it was a wonderful study, very well done, and it should be published. The second peer reviewer said, this is a wonderful study, very well done, but I don't believe it. Didn't want to. He had no criticism of it, nothing like that. The third one said, this is a wonderful study, very well done. And if he would do it with a synthetic progestin, then we'd publish it. He won't do it with a synthetic progestin because it won't work. Synthetic progestins do not do what progesterone does. So he got voted. He couldn't believe this. So he's trying to start up a study, get the University of California to do a study. But it's all been established. There is no doubt. Now we come to Dr. Cavalieri. Dr. Cavalieri is quite a character. His first name is Hercule Hercules. Hercule Cavalieri. Isn't that beautiful? He's about 75 years old, 78 years old. He's been head of the cancer research at the University of Nebraska for 25 years. He's been on the track of how does the body handle extra estrogen. And he found that of the two different estrogens, estriol is perfectly fine. Estriol is the estrogen that we make when you're pregnant. It prepares the uterus for a passage of a baby down through the birth canal and makes the cells so strong and so healthy and so happy that after they're torn up by a 10-pound baby, they all heal just fine. And that's what estriol does. It softens the cervix, prepares the vagina, and it doesn't cause breast cancer at all. So forget it. Here we have estradiol and estrone. This is Premarin. This is in Premarin, and estradiol is estrase. Those are the two estrogens. And in the liver, they interconvert with each other. It doesn't matter which one the doctor gives you. It changes into the other one anyway. They get all these people. Guess what conventional medicine wants to do with your public money next? Instead of using Prempro, they want to use estradiol. They said, oh, now we'll do an estradiol study. Why will they not do a progesterone study? Because it would stop the cancer industry cold. That's why. There's great money to be made fighting cancer. I'm going to tell you about Dr. Cavalieri. The estradiol and the estrone go through the liver, and the P450 system turns them into what's called catechol estrogens. That means it adds an extra hydroxyl, and then it methylates that, and carboxymethyltransferase. So if you have good methylating food in your stomach, and once it's methylated, it's totally safe, can't hurt anybody. However, if you subject yourself to eating trans fatty acids, like the butter substitutes, margarine, and you eat a lot of that in the United States, these trans fatty acids. These trans fatty acids originate as seed oils, or fish oils, or animal oil, and then they are modified by heat and pressure and hydrogenation and so on to become something that is stable on the shelf and is oily in consistency, and they sell it to you as safflower oil or as corn oil or something, but it's no longer those oils. They've been changed. There's a marvelous book out called Know Your Fats. It's by Dr. Mary S. Enig, E-N-I-G. She's a professor at the University of Maryland. She's the one that the government hires to test the fats in the food so they can put the information on the nutritional content. So she tests the foods and finds out how much of these trans fatty acids they have, and the government refuses to publish it. It buries that information. In Canada, it's on every label. In the United States, it's not. So you eat these bad fats that all cause cancer. And so it does it right here. It causes a quinone. A quinone is a high nitrogen bit that will damage your DNA, your genes. And then if you continue and don't know how to eat the amino acids that have sulfates in them, like methionine and cysteine, what happens is it causes adducts, things that add to the genes, and it causes mutations, and it leads directly to cancer. Now, Dr. Cavalieri has found all of the things in these steps that go this way. And he's found the nutritional ingredients that you need to make it go to the methylated estrogens that are perfectly safe for you. And he's proven it with other animals, and he's got clinical studies going now, and he's written a marvelous paper about how to stop it going from this way, and the people will not publish it. His publishers are the National Academy of Science. He's been doing this for years. He called them up and said, why are you not publishing I've explained to people what they can use so they don't get breast cancer. It's 27 years of work, and we now know how to stop this, just using nutrition. And they said, Dr. Cavalieri, we wanted you to find a medicine to treat breast cancer. We didn't want you to find some way to stop it. They actually told him that. Does this sound like a science problem or a politics problem or a greed problem or a money problem here? The science, there is no problem. We know what causes the breast cancer. We know what you should do so you don't get breast cancer. Anyway, this is Dr. Cavalieri's same work with the pictures of the quinones and all that. It's all the same thing. And they refuse to publish what it does. So at any rate, 20 years ago, I tried to figure out what is it that causes estrogen dominance? The man's question here. How does this come about? Well, it was clear to me that if you eat too much sugar and refined starches, that always happens. You always end up making more estrogen. And if you do have more body fat, you're going to make more estrogen in the body fat. But if you eat the sugars, you will make more estrogen. You see, our body cannot help but absorb sugar when you eat it. The body has no choice. It gets absorbed whether you like it or not. And it goes into your bloodstream, goes to the liver, and the liver sorts it all out and sends it to fat cells where it's all turned into fat. You have no place in your body where you can cut it open and say, whoa, look at all that sugar. It doesn't happen. You don't have it free any place. You take people who eat a lot of sugar, cut them open and open them up and look, and you say, whoa, look at all that fat. That's what the sugar becomes. So when it becomes fat, it starts making more estrogen. Over here, any excessive calorie intake will do it, but the big one is impaired liver function. Now, when I wrote this, I was thinking of cirrhosis, impaired liver function, or people with hepatitis C. But the more I look into it, I discover impaired liver function is very common in our society. And we make it worse by taking drugs that stop the liver from being able to do its work. In that business of getting estrogen out of the system, metabolizing estrogen, I mentioned the P450 system in the liver. Well, guess what? Prozac stops the P450 system from working. So if someone has estrogen dominance, they have depression, they have headaches, they're not doing well, they can't tolerate stress, they go to the doctor, and he puts them on Prozac. That increases their estrogen dominance. They can't excrete their own estrogen. So here we have impaired liver function. We do have people who drink too much, but actually the liver does pretty well with that. But if you have Prozac, you're damaged. You can't do that. Then we have environmental. Estrogen is fed to steers. Now, estrogen that's fed to steers is not destroyed by the steer. It is just stored in the steer's fat. And when you eat that steer, sliced up by your meat market, you're going to be getting that estrogen. But in addition, they give those steers grain, corn and grains, that's been sprayed by the xenoestrogens of the pesticides. These are petrochemical products that cannot be destroyed in nature. They are all fat soluble. They will pass from the steer to you. They're estrogenic. They damage your ability, and particularly they damage the baby that you're carrying. So the baby will then get the cancer later on. And then when you die and they put you in the ground, it gets picked up by the local streams eventually, and it's in the oceans of today, and it's already down at the South Pole. You can find these same xenoestrogens in the creatures that live down the South Pole. It's in the fish around the world. It's in Lake Michigan. It's happening all over the place. Wherever you have these pesticides going into, you have animals carrying this stuff, and it will not be destroyed. And we have to stop that. Then, stress, it turns out, is big. It does make more estrogen. The cortisol is made by stress, and the cortisol inhibits the progesterone receptors. So cortisol, from stress, interferes with your progesterone, and you become estrogen dominant. Not only that, it causes anovulatory cycles. If you send somebody off to the university and they get a bad mark on their course and their boyfriend leaves them and something else happens, God knows what happens under a lot of stress, they're going to stop having periods for a while. This happens very often. And when you're not ovulating, you're not making the progesterone. So therefore, but then the big one is iatrogenic. This means doctor-caused. Doctor-caused. Birth control pills, conventional ERT and HRT. And I did this 20 years ago. 15 years ago, I can't remember, time goes so fast. But that was my first attempt, and it wasn't bad, because all this has been found to be true. However, this is what I call the maze. This is where we are now. And at first sight, this is over-impressive, and you feel, my God, I'll never understand this. But this is repeated in every chapter, because in every chapter we take one part of it and explain how that makes estrogen dominance, how these make estrogen dominance, how this makes estrogen dominance, how thyroid, melatonin, cortisol, the adrenal gland, all can end up there. The breast stroma is affected, immune cytokines, and poor diet, and I'm going to show you this one. So bit by bit through the book, we teach you every one of these, and the big surprise is, at the end of the book, you understand it all. And number two, you discover it's all preventable. You don't need any of these things. Let me show you this one right down here, the melatonin. If you do not get to sleep in a black, dark room, like at night, your pineal gland does not turn on and make melatonin. If you don't make melatonin, your ovaries aren't going to make progesterone. If you don't make progesterone, you become estrogen dominant. So nurses who work at night in the intensive care wards under bright lights, and they try to sleep during the day when it isn't dark, are you surprised that the risk of breast cancer is 65% greater than if they didn't have that work? That work makes the risk of breast cancer go up 65%. Well, she could treat that by adding a little melatonin. But if you could teach them to measure their estrogen and progesterone levels, and they become estrogen dominant, you can treat it by adding a little progesterone. You can protect them, or you can give them the melatonin. These are all the things that cause estrogen dominance, and 80 to 90% of all the breast cancers come right here. And they're all preventable. There are two types of genetic cancers. One is called the HER2-neu, NOI actually, N-E-U, HER-2/NEU, HER2-neu. That's a gene. And if the gene makes the wrong product, it goes through some genetic problem, it makes a breast cancer that is not connected to the hormones. So on that particular one, I don't know what the treatment is. I'm hopeful some bright person. Fortunately, it's only a tiny part of the breast cancer. The other genes that have all the publicity is the BRCA. Can you believe it? Some people call it BRCA. BRCA stands for breast cancer. BRCA genes. It's not one gene, it's a group of 6 genes. And it turns out if you maintain a proper progesterone level, it never causes breast cancer. It's only in the women who become estrogen dominant that trips off the BRCA genes. So even that one can be controlled by the progesterone. So that's why we say we can easily stop 90% of the breast cancers just by learning this. When Israel took out trans fatty acids and wouldn't let any store in Israel make trans fatty acids, the number of breast cancers in 5 years fell 15%. It can be done. There's nothing to it. In Canada, they teach you which foods have the trans fatty acids. In America, the government won't tell you how much is in the Wheaties you eat. So I'm going to show you an example. This is the one where people eat too much sugar. You know our country's getting fatter. The little kids in school are getting fatter. Everybody's getting insulin resistance. If you overeat sugar all the time and make all that insulin, you sometimes have insulin excess, and so the body creates something that blocks the insulin from working. So you have insulin resistance. So you have high sugar, high fat, and insulin resistance at the same time. And these are the people who end up getting all these cancers. Now I want to show you where this comes from. This is a study in Toronto, and there's a lady from Toronto here today. A 3-fold increased risk of dying from breast cancer. It happens to people who have insulin resistance coming from eating all these sugars and highly refined. You see, maple syrup, pancakes, waffles, these are all forms of sugar. Coca-Cola is 9 teaspoons of sugar. Pepsi is 9.2 teaspoons of sugar. Our intake of sugar at the 1900 was 2 pounds per person per year, and now it's 180. And in kids, it's 300 a day. 300 pounds a year. It's almost a pound of sugar a day. And we're killing ourselves doing this. In insulin resistance, your cells cannot use the sugar that you eat because the insulin isn't working. So therefore, it can only turn the sugars into fat. Guess what cell in your body is never bothered by insulin resistance? Cancer cells. Cancer cells don't get insulin resistant. They can use their fuel for growth and making more of themselves. They're going to outgrow the normal cells and they're going to kill you. Why would you want to do this to yourself? The cancer cells have an advantage here, and you are at a disadvantage. I wrote up this last night, rules for hormone supplements. You wonder, how does this come about? What are they doing? In the typical HRT that's given, they give it to people without ever checking to see if they actually are deficient in estrogen. How many people have been put on HRT and your doctor never bothered to check, right? Everybody. That's the way it always works. He never checks for progesterone. He has no idea what your hormone levels are, and he makes this big decision to put you on potent hormones that can kill you. So the first rule, only give hormones to people who need it. That's what you would do for insulin. That's what you do for thyroid. That's what you do for practically everything. If someone needs it, then you give a little, or you find a way to help them with it. It might be a nutritional way or something. But you don't willy-nilly treat people with powerful medicines without finding out if they need it. So that's the first thing. Give hormones only to people who need it. Second one, use the bioidentical hormones, not the synthetic ones. The synthetic ones are designed to be different. They're something not found in nature. Your body doesn't know what to do with them. Your body can't use them to make another hormone like it can with progesterone. Progesterone can contribute to all the other good hormones. But you take a synthetic progestin, that's the end of the line. Your body doesn't even know how to get it out of your system. It occupies the progesterone receptors and won't let go. So your own progesterone can't work. So if you're going to add a hormone, use the real one. We have real insulin. We have human insulin now. We have human estrogens. We have human progesterone. We have human testosterone. Why doesn't your doctor use it? Because they can't be patented. There's no one to make money. To make money, you have to use the synthetics because they are unique. They're not found in nature and they can be patented. You see, this is a scam. The real hormones are there. They've been there for 60 years. But doctors don't use them. Use dosages that create normal physiological levels. That means they have to learn how to use saliva. They don't know what the dose does. They don't know where it goes in your body. They don't know what the level is in your tissues. They don't know anything about the fate of that hormone they're giving you. They could do a saliva test and see if you're in the range of people who live on this planet. They are giving estrogen in doses 8 to 10 times larger than any human need. First, they violate the first one. They give it to people who don't need it, and they give it in doses that are 8 to 10 times higher than human need. And this is reported in Lancet. This is reported in the New England Journal of Medicine. There's no doubt about this. Everybody agrees that traditional HRT supplies 8 to 10 times more estrogen than you need. It's because the doctor has no idea of what he's doing. And he's not using bioidentical hormones. He's using synthetic ones, the ones that your body can't tolerate. Conventional HRT routinely violates all of these guidelines. It should all be malpractice. Now, there's a couple little things. Tissue hormone levels can be measured by saliva testing, but not by conventional serum tests. Serum tests are how much are floating around in the serum. That has nothing to do with how much gets to the tissues. P.S. number 2, never give supplemental estrogen without proper balancing with progesterone. See, that should be built into all things. No one should give estrogen to women without giving progesterone. The body continues to make estrogen. Women are not estrogen deficient usually. Only the skinny ones are. But if you decide to give some estrogen to somebody, you should always have progesterone. And we know what the ratio is. We know the ratio should be 200 to 1. There should be 200 times much progesterone as the estradiol when you test with saliva. We can do that with a saliva test. So those, I shouldn't even bother to have to say that, because since everybody's estrogen dominant and you're getting all these estrogens from the environment, you certainly don't want to give more estrogen to people when you know that's what causes the cancer. But if you want to, for some reason, and you prove that they're a little low, if you give the estrogen, be sure to give the progesterone at the same time. I hope you all now understand. There is no mystery about the problem with breast cancer. We know what the problem is. Scientists like myself and all across around the world all know. I gave a talk in Nebraska, Kansas, University of Kansas, to the post-PhD group that are teaching there, and I showed them all this thing, and they gave me a little hand at the end. And then the head of the biochemists department said, John, don't feel so bad about that. You were preaching to the choir. We all know this. Why does not medicine know this? How can doctors continue to practice when all this information is known, and you've done a nice job explaining it and all that, but the big thing is, why does this go on? Why are they allowed to keep killing people just for the sake of the money that they make? The PhD biochemists, they know these things. This is a secret only that the doctors don't know. Everybody else knows these things. And so that's what I've been trying to do. I wrote 5 books since I quit practice in the last 10, 12 years. And I'm happy to report these books sell very well, and they're published in 9 different languages. So we're just trying to get this information in the hands of people. This is a terrible tragedy. You just need to learn how to do it right. And by reading the book, you can see all of the various ways that the estrogen dominance occurs. They're all preventable. You can make these choices. You can stop it. If you do have the breast cancer, the best treatment in the world is to restore the progesterone level. Regardless of what other thing you do, you must do that. We now know what the truth is, and we know what we need to do, and it's up to you now to spread the word. Thank you very much.
The next portion of the seminar is devoted to questions and answers submitted by the seminar attendees.
www.johnleemd.com. That will get you to lots of answers about how to get books and things like that. And the other one, the info one, I don't get it directly. My co-author, Virginia Hopkins down in San Diego, gets it. And she answers most of the questions. She's brilliant, much smarter than me. And some of the ones that she thinks I needed to answer, she faxes to me. We have a monthly newsletter that you can get through our website, johnleemd.com, and in that we try to answer people's letters too. And we get a lot of questions that a lot of people ask, and so those are the ones we use to answer, because we're helping lots of people. Figure lots of people have the same question. I've talked a lot about getting saliva tests. There's a certain art and skill to doing it right. If you want to test the hormones that your body is making, say you're 25, 36, 40 years old, still having periods, you can actually collect the saliva anytime, because every 55 minutes your body is readjusting your hormone levels. And so you can collect the saliva at any time and you'll get meaningful results. However, if you're at the point where you're supplying the progesterone, no longer measuring just the amounts that the body's making, but you want to measure how much is coming through the skin, then you have to know about the absorption and excretion curve. It's absorbed through skin, so it hits a maximum absorption in about 2.5 hours. All the progesterone that was in the cream, see, the cream is not absorbed. It's only the progesterone that gets absorbed. Very few things go through the skin. You could take somebody's skin and make it into a bag and you could carry water with it. They do that with goats. You know that. So the skin, water doesn't even go through skin. You stand out buck naked in a rainstorm and you will not absorb any water. However, there are certain molecules that are small, fat soluble. They don't have much of an electromagnetic charge. They slip right through. So they get in. In the case of progesterone and testosterone, to find what the right number is, because he's measuring it at a time when it's mostly gone. And if you do the measurement 2 or 3 hours after applying it, you're going to get a high number. The way to standardize the test when you're measuring the amount that you're putting on the skin is to wait 10 hours. halfway through the curve. So always collect the saliva 10 hours after applying it. In the morning, I apply my progesterone and testosterone about 7 o'clock in the morning. And if I want to check my saliva, I do it at 5 in the afternoon. That's 10 hours later. So don't pay any attention to what the lab says about catching it in the morning or doing it at night. It all depends on when you applied the cream. And then all subsequent tests, you do it the same way. Then you have a way to compare one test with another. Because these are big changes that occur. This is a high curve that develops, and it all goes out in 24 hours. I have people call me and say, I've been on the cream for 2 years, and it doesn't absorb into my skin. I say, how do you know that? Well, I've checked with saliva tests, and it doesn't show up. First, they tried checking with the serum tests, and of course, it doesn't show up there. But they said, we tried saliva. And I said, how long do you have to wait between applying the cream and doing it? Well, my doctor told me to wait 2 weeks. You know, it's crazy. But at any rate, we feel that's important information. You're wasting your money if you don't know how to do it right. So that's why I think you ought to know. See, most labs don't even keep track of when you applied the cream. See, Dr. Zava does ask you. So when see, that's why I like Dr. Zava's lab. He will ask you, when did you last apply the cream? And he's been doing this by the thousands and thousands. So he can imagine in his mind where the curve would be to reach at that point. But the rest of us aren't quite as bright as Dr. Zava, so I like to standardize it and do it 10 hours later, because then we can follow that and do it the same way the next time. Then we know whether you're going up or going down.
If the greater breast cancer death rate among women who get mammograms compared to those who don't, if that's statistically significant?
The curve showed that there's slightly more women dying ones who took the mammograms. Now, it could be that maybe they have a different disease, or it could be that there's something about passing X-ray through your breasts every year increases it. And I don't know if it's statistically significant or not. It doesn't matter to me. The point is, there was no benefit. There's no reason to do that. And by the way, most of you are too young, but there used to be shoe stores. There used to be a machine you could stand in and you could look down at a fluoroscope. And you could see the bones in your right through your shoes and everything. You know why they don't have those machines anymore? Because if you take little 10-year-old girls and have them do that a couple times a month, they're the ones that are going to get breast cancer when they're 16. Because that X-ray is one of the things that causes cells to change and to mutate. And they mutate into things that cause cancer. So they don't do that anymore. But you see, they don't come out with headlines on things like that. They just make the change and hope you'll forget.
Do you think mammograms are contributors?
They contribute to bad things in a lot of ways. I had a lot of patients who I would find a lump in, or the patients themselves would find a lump. And they'd do a mammogram, and the mammogram wouldn't show anything bad. So they'd say, oh, it's nothing. And next year, they have cancer spread through their lungs and their rib cage and in their backbones and up in their brain and every place else. So it causes false negatives 35% of the time. 35% of the time when you have a cancer there, the machine misses it. 35% of the time when you don't have a cancer there, the machine finds a little something that it says, oh, we better look into this. So it ends up with all sorts of biopsies and every other damn thing. And it's better if you don't have it. Most countries around the world have given up on it. Thermography is the coming thing. It's not the same as mammograms. It reads different things. It'll often find hot spots. See, it measures temperature. It'll find areas where there's a heat. When you have an underlying metabolic disorder, you have a battle. You've got elements that are trying to say yes, and other elements are saying no, and there's a battle. And sometimes the battle leaves little tiny bits of calcium behind, like debris from a real battle. And those little calcifications can be seen. So that's a sign of a battle. But heat is a sign of a battle, too. So you can find that, and if you have a woman who has a hot spot on one of their breasts, that's the place you should start looking, is measurement of heat. And you don't have to squish the breast to do it. You can do it from 6 feet away.
Are there adverse effects from too much progesterone in the body?
Yes, generally in doses that are natural to humans on this planet, there are no side effects whatsoever. However, there are very clever people out there who manage to convince other people, or the patient herself convinces a series of different doctors to give her so much progesterone. She's taking maybe 5,000, 6,000 milligrams a day. And she's acting very weirdly. Turns out that the liver tries its best to metabolize the excess progesterone. And it does so by creating 3 versions of called pregnanes. Pregnanes are the basic chassis, but with pieces of it broken off. That's how it's excreted. And there is one called nanopregnanolone, or allopregnanolone is one of the 3 waste products. And normally it's a small amount. And in small amounts, it has a calming effect on your brain. But in large amounts, it has an anesthetic effect on your brain. In fact, you could separate it out and use it as an anesthetic to do brain surgery. And so people who get into way too much progesterone and keep at it for weeks and weeks and months, they get to a point where they sit around at home and they don't get anything done. And they can't carry on a conversation very well. And the husband doesn't understand. And pretty soon the wife is in a psychiatrist's office and given the diagnosis of depression. And then he, of course, then her treatment becomes Prozac. And so she can't get rid of her estrogen. Everything gets worse, all because somebody forgot to measure her hormones. I've never seen a side effect when you use normal physiological doses.
I took the birth control pill for 30 years, started at 16, and have been on HRT for 3 years. Am I doomed?
You've really increased your risk. You're not necessarily doomed. What you've got to do is correct everything now and stop it before cells get out of hand here. Birth control pills, when given to little kids, like 8 years old and 10 years old and 12-year-old kids are getting it because they show up with acne or they show up with little rashes here and there. And there are doctors out there who give these little kids birth control pills. And it increases their ultimate risk of breast cancer by over 65%. And this is a study done by the National Cancer Institute. Now, if you're 26 years old and you're sleeping with somebody you hope to marry and you don't want to have kids right away, a couple of years of birth control pills don't seem to hurt you. However, if you get up around 5 years of it, the chances are when you go off, you have a good chance of never having another period. It's called secondary hypogonadism, because all of a sudden your ovaries have been out of the loop. When you take birth control pills, your own ovaries don't do anything. Doesn't do any good at all. If you were to be given progesterone, it wouldn't help, because the drugs used in the birth control pills are totally foreign to your body. There was a question here. The doses are so tiny, how can they hurt you? It's not that the doses are tiny. The doses are tiny because the body doesn't know how to get it out of you, so it just keeps working and working and working. We don't have the the metabolic tools to rid our body of these foreign things. So they are very potent, but that's why they're small dose, but they're still potent, and you shouldn't have them. So I think there's a slight risk. The longer you use birth control pills, the more likely you are to never have normal ovaries again, which means more likely you are to always be progesterone deficient. And since we live in an estrogen-dominated world, you increase your risk. I don't think it should be done. Somehow there has to be a better way for that. But it's not the big risk that a lot of people claim, except for the very young girls. So I think you should get off your HRT, and you should do a saliva test, and you will find that you're deficient in progesterone, and you probably, depends how much body weight you have, and you may not need any estrogen at all. All you may need is a little bit of progesterone. And you might need testosterone. So as long as you're having the saliva test, you should test for testosterone too.
Which hormones to test for, and how is that decided?
Well, prior to doing these tests, see, we've learned a lot over the last 20 years. Fortunately, when we write new books, we try to incorporate what we learned, but we never have to undo what we said before, which is the good thing. We can just write a new book and move on. And so we've done this now through 5 books. But we've learned, for instance, that testosterone deficiency is much more common than normally thought. And so we're recommending to people that they do more testosterone testing. And it turns out that being low in testosterone is very, very important. When you're low in testosterone, you don't have much energy, you can't handle problems very well, you're depressed most of the time, you have no libido, and you don't know what's wrong, and it's very frustrating. And they'll go to their doctor with this list of complaints, and the last thing in his mind is to look for testosterone. And that's the only thing they need. And a beautiful study was in the New England Journal of Medicine, October 3 years ago, from Massachusetts General Hospital, where they train Harvard doctors. They had women like this, And somebody said, oh, let's look and see what their testosterone is. Then they discovered that the routine blood test is useless for this, so they eventually got around to testing for the free hormone. And they found these women, they had about 30 of them, were low in the real testosterone. So they gave 4 different doses. They gave a 1/4 milligram, a 1/2 milligram, a full milligram, and 2 milligrams a day as a cream. Taking it by mouth doesn't work. Taking it by shot is old-fashioned and no good. It's painful. Things rub it on. So they gave it in 4 doses, and they found that the lowest dose was just as good as the highest dose. All these women, within a few weeks, they're all back to normal good health. The 1/4 milligram, tiny little bit, by cream, raised their testosterone 5-fold. So men need 1 or 2 milligrams of testosterone, women need 1/4 milligram to 1/2 milligram testosterone, and it'll bring it back to normal. And that's the whole purpose. We're not treating someone, we're not trying to raise the level into some unusual range. We want it just back to the level of healthy people.
If a cancer tumor is both progesterone and estrogen receptor positive, should you use progesterone cream?
A good question. Now you must understand how the words are carefully written, that the tumor was estrogen positive and progesterone positive. What was positive there? I mean, what were they measuring? Do you have any idea? They were measuring to see whether the tissue had receptors. The receptors. If they have receptors for these hormones, then it's called receptor positive. If they search the cell material and they can't find any receptor, then they call it receptor negative. The receptor is merely the thing that the cell needs so it can hear the message of the hormone, right? So if you don't have any receptors, you can't hear the message, correct? If you don't have a phone, you're not going to get a phone call. Correct? Correct. That's what it's necessary for. If you don't have any progesterone receptors, you cannot hear the progesterone message. You want the progesterone message. The progesterone message to the cells is, don't multiply, don't turn into more, don't go through this hyperplasia business with me, don't turn into cancer, stop what you're doing. That's the message of progesterone. The message of estrogen is to say, multiply, grow, make more of yourself, spread through the body, become cancer, kill the lady. That's the message of estrogen. So you don't want to help that message. So when you find that you're progesterone receptor negative, that means giving you progesterone is not going to help your life at all. Now, fortunately, the tests are wrong so often, don't pay any attention to it. Give the progesterone anyway. The other thing you need to know about this is the thing that makes the progesterone receptor is estrogen. The more estrogen dominant you are, the more progesterone receptors you need. The body wants to hear the message of progesterone. Body is trying to set up receptors so no matter where the message came from, they'll catch it. So high levels of progesterone receptors means that your body wants progesterone. You need it because it's made by excess estrogen. That's what makes excess progesterone receptors. And the doctors don't understand a bit of this. When you explain it to your doctor, be kind. Realize that they are so far off the beam, they have a hard time understanding this. Doing the test is one thing. Interpreting the test is another. They all interpret it wrong. They will say, oh my God, she's got a bunch of progesterone receptors. We better not give her any progesterone. No, that's just a sign of estrogen dominance. That's the lady who can benefit. When Dr. Zava did his study of 3,000 women, one of them was a lady who did have the proper amount of progesterone. And she died of her breast cancer, that one. And in further study, they found that her body was unable to make progesterone receptors. So even though she had the right amount of progesterone, her cells could not get the message. She was 16 when she got her cancer, and she died in 6 weeks. There is no treatment that could help her. She's going to go downhill and die because she makes estrogen. There's no way to stop it because she has no progesterone receptors, and so she died. Do you follow what happened there? This is not so tough. Fortunately, this business of not being able to make a progesterone receptor is very, very rare. And for some reason, that gene to do that was lost. So estrogen could not stimulate the cell to make a progesterone receptor. So therefore, when she got her cancer, she's dead. So yes, that doctor should should give you the progesterone, because if you've got a lot of progesterone receptors, it merely means you're estrogen dominant.
Can you talk a little bit about the difference between sublingual progesterone and transdermal?
Right, we've done tests on this. If you take sublingual oil drops or a lozenge of some sort, or what do they call it, to put a troche in your cheek, the absorption from, if it's an oil, to put it in your cheek, the absorption takes place in 15 minutes. It's all absorbed. So it's wonderful for aborting a migraine headache. But it's stupid to use if you're trying to restore hormone order in anybody's body, because you get this high spike in 15 minutes, and in 90 minutes it's all gone. It's cleared through the liver, it's gone out through the kidneys, it's gone. So for 22 hours a day, you have no progesterone. What you want is slow absorption over a long period of time. And the cream is the best thing we've got for that. I'll be very happy if someone were to make a little patch that you could put on, like estradiol patches, and have it go in, say, in surges every 3 or 4 hours or something. That would be ideal. But the best we have right now is a regular cream. You get one surge, but it takes 24 hours to go out. So you've got pretty good coverage. Or you could do half doses twice a day. You're free to experiment with this. It can't hurt you. I don't like drops, except they were advantageous for people who had migraines. It's the perfect way to abort a migraine.
I've taken Fosamax for 3 years. Now the doctors say I have osteopenia, not osteoporosis. Is this false?
There's so many scams going on in that question. It's hard to explain. Osteopenia is the chicken way of saying, gee, your bones aren't as strong as I think they ought to be. It just means, like anemia means your blood count isn't quite as high as it ought to be. Osteopenia, the enia part, means not as high as we think it ought to be. And if it gets a little bit higher, then they call it osteoporosis. And they have these guidelines. If it's a certain bone mineral density, then it's osteoporosis. And if it's a little above that, it's not. That's like saying that if you're 3 months pregnant, but we can't hear the heartbeat, then you're not pregnant. But at 4 months, we can hear the heartbeat. Yeah, you're pregnant. See, it's just as stupid as that. You should think of osteoporosis as a process. The process starts when you're 35. All studies show that women, their peak bone mass occurs around age 35. And after age 35, they start losing bone. They lose bone at 1 to 1.5% a year. And then at menopause, they lose it 4 or 5% a year for 2 or 3 years. Then it reverts back to 1% a year after that. So osteoporosis starts when you're 35. You're obviously in the safe range. But every year they test, it's lower than it was before. So there's something going on. That something going on is osteoporosis. It coincides exactly with the fact that most women start losing progesterone at age 35. They're still making all the estrogen they always did. They have all these periods. So this loss is not due to estrogen. There is no sign that estrogen deficiency is the cause of osteoporosis. All the signs say it's progesterone and testosterone deficiency and bad diet and lack of exercise. There is no study that shows that estrogen is good for bones. Estrogen slows up bone loss, but it does nothing for new bone formation. It's the dumbest thing in the world to treat, that's why it doesn't work if you give just estrogen. You have to build new bone up to restore it. So at any rate, they use these funny words. Now, the way that the scam comes in is that 10 years ago, the level that was called osteoporosis was at a certain place, and now they've lowered it so that many more women now are called osteoporosis because they want you into treatment. They want to give you Fosamax. They want to give you all this stuff. They want to do all these tests. They want to make all this money. So they just lowered the level and said so it's easier for someone. So the poor radiologists say, now you're in the level, we can call it osteoporosis. Well, it turns out that the way these tests work, it's a beam of energy that's shown through you. It could be light, it could be X-ray, could be radon, could be various things, photons. They shine a beam through you, and if the beam particles hit particles of mineral, they bounce off. So the beam that gets all the way through is the beam energy that didn't hit anything. So the more mineral there is in the path of the beam, the greater will be the drop in the energy when it comes out of the other side of the body, the beam. You all follow that? It's like shining a flashlight through a light handkerchief, and then a blankie, and then a thicker one, and so pretty soon none of the light comes out on the other side. So you can tell you can call that a density of something that prevents the beam going through. Well, it's perfectly obvious that if you have a woman who weighs 180 pounds and chops wood for a living, she's probably going to have very big, tough, strong bones. If she's 80 pounds and very petite and doesn't do much exercise, her bones might be just fine for her weight, but being a smaller bone, there's a smaller passage, the traverse of the beam through the bone is a smaller area. And so therefore you'll get smaller numbers. In the class I taught, I used to use the idea of Sweden, and my grandparents were from Sweden, and I'd say, pretend that there's an area in Sweden where you have one drunk Swede for every mile. And so someone comes back and says, I went down that road and I saw 5 drunk Swedes. The other one says, well, I went down the same day and I found 10 drunk Swedes. So you say, how far did you go? I went 5 miles, the other guy went 10 miles. Depends how far the traverse is, right? Same thing with the bones. If you got someone big bones, the traverse is big. If you got little bones, the traverse is small. So they get different numbers. So all these little people are told they have osteoporosis, and they don't. And all the big people, they say, well, your bones are okay, but not very good. But they're large. They should have bigger bone mineral densities. The doctors are misdiagnosing osteoporosis. Not everybody needs these hormones. The people have enough. Exercise can do so much. The right diet can do so much. But if you have the problem, and you do have a declining bone mineral density, it's very likely you need progesterone or testosterone or both to restore new bone formation. Estrogen does nothing for new bone formation. At any rate, it's part of another scam. There's a wonderful book out about the supposed osteoporosis epidemic. The epidemic occurred because they lowered the guidelines for diagnosing osteoporosis. They made more of you to have osteoporosis than you really do.
If I feel tamoxifen is effective in preventing breast cancer, should I take progesterone cream?
Yeah, the two are not connected at all. Tamoxifen is supposed to interfere with the receptor sites for estrogen in the breast. Unfortunately, it's estrogenic in the uterus and it is a cancer-causing drug. And almost all countries have abandoned it. It's been out for 26 years. It's never been proven to have any beneficial effect on anybody in preventing breast cancer. There is no study that shows that. They all show no effect and bad effect. So most doctors refuse to prescribe it after 2 or 3 years. 100% of doctors, I think, refuse to prescribe it after 5 years, because after that the side effects begin showing up. Strokes, cancers, and so on. I've never used it in my practice at all. However, progesterone is protective against breast cancer. Period. It tells the genes in those cells to not make cancer cells out of themselves. Has no relation to tamoxifen. Don't ever put them in the same sentence again. Progesterone is beneficial. All studies show that it helps prevent breast cells to turn into cancer cells. That's your goal. You don't want normal breast cells to become cancer cells. So you can do the progesterone, you get it to be 200, 300 times greater than your estradiol, and that's as good as you can get. There is no better treatment.
Is DCIS multiductal cancer or not?
Oh, DCIS. Yeah, that's ductal carcinoma in situ. We talked about that. If it's in situ, means there's a funny cell scattered here and there through the field when they look through the microscope. There's no big cluster of cells altogether. That's why it could never be filled. It's not a lump. You'll never find it that way. They found it by finding microcalcifications, which are the result of a prolonged battle between two competing forces in the life of your breast cells. And so there's no edges to this. It's not a tumor. Now, there are some that the pathologist will look at and say, whoa, these cells are growing right through various walls, various ducts, various muscle cells, various tissue lines. They're invasive, they're moving. That's the one you should have a mastectomy on. The other one, just get your hormones in balance, and that's the end of it. You won't have any more problems. So it's nice to have a biopsy, and if it shows invasive cancer, no matter what else they call it, it probably should result in a mastectomy. But then you must correct the underlying metabolic imbalance, or else it'll show up. There's no edge to the tumor. There's no tumor there. There's no way they can say it's ever completely removed. So the vast majority of them are just simple DCIS, ductal carcinoma in situ. They do not need to be treated, except by getting your hormone balance back, and then you've solved the underlying metabolic imbalance, and therefore they won't do anything.
Mount Zion is saying that DCIS is precancerous.
You see, humans are not rational animals. Humans are rationalizing animals. He calls it a precancer because when he finds these and doesn't treat them, 1 or 2 down the line will show up with cancer later. I just mentioned that. You understood what I said? Well, if you find that they're invasive, then that's the one that needs to be treated. The one that's not invasive is not any danger, it's not precancerous, it's not anything. It's just that in his rationality, his rationalization, he thinks it's a step and that the next step is unavoidable. The next step is avoidable. Don't take that next step. Get your hormones in balance, and that's it. See, treating the body is like doing something to a black box. Someone got a black box and it's got all these gauges and handles and knobs and whistles and blues and everything on there, and you do something. You put in something, you stand back, and then you watch. And then from whatever happens, you make up a theory to explain what happened in the black box. But you don't know if that theory is right or wrong. You need more information about it. So doctors make up these theories, and if the theories make money, then the theory stays in place.
How do I get off HRT? What's the best procedure?
Yeah, well, what I've told people, don't panic. First, you should get a saliva hormone level and see how bad the situation is. And you'll find that your estradiol is way too high, your progesterone is practically zero because the doctor hasn't been giving you any. I had one lady in Canada send me 10 pounds of her medical records. She said she's seen 5 different doctors and they've tried everything and she feels terrible. And I saw that she was taking Provera, which is in the pro part of Prempro. And the doctor kept giving her more and more Provera, and then he would have a lab test to see what her progesterone level was. And in each case, it was still close to zero. And he would give more, and he created all these illnesses in this poor lady. It's Provera is a terrible drug. It causes all sorts of liver problems and strokes and everything else. Finally, the lab tech wrote on the last one, "Doctor, you are giving this lady Provera. You are asking me to check for progesterone. Provera is not progesterone." The lab tech knew, see? So at any rate, what you do is you usually end up cutting your estrogen in half. And you got to throw away Prempro because you can't separate the 2 ingredients. Because you want to throw away the Provera part completely. So then you can get some progesterone. And you start with 12, 15 milligrams a day. And then you wait 3 months and do another saliva test. And if your estradiol is still too high, you bring that down another notch. And if the progesterone needs more or you've given too much, you can make that adjustment. And in short, next 6 months, you've got everything in order. You don't have too much estradiol. You've got the right balance between the 2, and you never have to worry about it again. Nothing to it. Normally, the women find that they don't really need any estrogen at all. By age 80, 65% of women are still making all the estrogen they need. And it'll show up in the saliva test. And they'll show that the doctor was giving you estrogen and you didn't even need it. So if you find that you don't need any, that's fine. But if you find that you need a little bit, that's okay, as long as it's covered with the progesterone. So it's not a dilemma. It's not a problem. Some people ask questions about phytoestrogens. You all know what phytoestrogens are? They're estrogenic materials that are found in plants. And that's what phytoestrogens mean. However, the estrogenic material has no relation to the hormones that we're talking about. They do tend to occupy estrogen receptors, and they have a very weak action. They're 200 times weaker than the weakest estrogen your body makes. They're very weak. But for some people, just occupying the estrogen receptors helps them with hot flushes. So I don't mind people trying these herbs and things, black cohosh and all these things. I don't mind you trying. People have tried them for the last 6,000 years. And on some people, they seem to help. But it's a minority of people.
Thank you again, Dr. Lee. We greatly appreciate it.
Thank you. Good luck.